Does that not mean? Oh,
Yes, there we go. Right. There we go.
Okay, welcome everybody. Apologies for the slight delay. We are here to do our Inclusion for All, How Can We Accelerate Action webinar, which is the theme. So Accelerate Action is the theme for International Women's Day. What we have acknowledged is the importance that we all have to be responsible, accountable for any type of shift, any type of change. Before we get started, we're just going to do some admin, as it were, housekeeping. So microphones off unless you're the speaker. As we've said, if you don't want to be recorded, then if you could turn your screen off. We've got the chat function, we've got the sort of emoji box, which myself and Anthea will monitor. If you've got any questions, we will share the slides, so do not worry, don't write down a load of notes. But what we're going to talk about gender equity and the history of it, and the fact that it is actually still relevant, because, you know, some of the challenges we have around International Women's Day are about, well, why are we bothering now? Women, you know, of course it's equal, and just demonstrate that it's still very recent history, and actually there are still some differences that exist, which we need to talk about. How inclusion benefits everybody, and why actually a better world for women specifically. Obviously, we're talking about women because we're referencing International Women's Day. If we were going to talk about, if it's International Men's Day, we would talk about International Men's Day and the impact there. How we can break the barriers, so how we can bring more people into the conversation, what we can do, what we can say, how we can make equity, or the lack of equity, inequality, inequity, resonate with people. And we will talk about privilege as well, and then also about how it is everybody's responsibility. So imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination, a world that's diverse, equitable and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge gender equity. Collectively, for International Women's Day 2025, we can all accelerate action. Okay, so first things first, let's skip a few of these. You don't need this. Right. History of gender. World War I and World War II. So women, as many of us know, filled the gaps left by men who went to the front line, who went to serve during the various different wars. So World War I, World War II predominantly. However, you know, whilst women worked as drivers, post workers, police, they stood in factories, they cleaned trains. There were loads of new opportunities, but the conditions were poor. And actually, whilst they were earning more money than they had done pre-war, they were still being paid less than half of what men were doing for the same jobs. Now, we could absolutely argue there was a war effort, you know, all of the money that we had went funneling into that. However, that demonstrated the lack of value placed on women's work, and we still have that hangover now. Equal work for equal pay is a law. However, there is still a gender pay gap. So women on average are paid less than men. Okay, and that is not the same as equal work for equal pay, which is a legal requirement. I don't know why that's rolling through like that. Here we go. So history of gender equity. This is, you know, women at work, as it were, in the war. 1919, Dr. Ivy Williams became the first woman to be called to the bar in England, so to qualify as a barrister solicitor, and she was the first woman to receive a Doctor of Civil Law. That was because the Sex Disqualification Act was removed. So up until 1919, there was a law which disqualified women from doing certain roles, all right, particularly in law and finance. It was a big step forward, but attitude, sexism, discrimination didn't change with that shift in law. Okay. 1925 to 1931, women could be recruited directly into administrative gradings of the civil service, but it found that most departments didn't employ women in those posts. So whilst they were able to, there was something else at play: opinion, society, bias that prevented women from doing that. Equally, the Ministry of Defence only employed women as typists, and women in the post office were exclusively in a separate, worse paid women's branch. Okay. 1950s to 1960s is the marriage penalty. So women who were married could not work in occupations such as teaching or clerical jobs. All right. When single women who were in those roles got married, they were sacked. And we've had, Anthea and I have had a couple of conversations about, you know, real life people that we know whose parents or mothers particularly were impacted by this. So fantastic people, talented people, people who were brilliant teachers were removed from their profession and their career. trade unions membership did grow in these decades, but were led by white men who didn't always prioritize or understand the demands of women and non-white members. That is our first reference to privilege. That is our first reference to, who created the country, who created the laws, who created the institutions in which we work, who created the norms of behavior, the standards, the values, or the expectations that we're supposed to conform to. I used the example on a different call today about men wearing a dress. So if you think about your working environments, you've got some women on the call, and you will not know if people don't have to wear PPE or uniform. You will not know. You will not be able to think of all of the women that work in your environment who's wearing a dress and who's wearing trousers. It's just so normal, you don't even think about it. If a man were to come to work in a dress or a skirt that was not religious, not cultural, you would all know. Why? Because it's not normal. Well, who sets that norm? And that is just society. So the brilliant thing is about these norms and these traditions and the sort of historical views, we can change them. Because at one point it wasn't acceptable for women to wear trousers, and now it's so normal that we wouldn't even know who is wearing trousers, who isn't, who's wearing a dress, who isn't. But there is still a difference. So when we say, well, everything, women always get treated the same, well, we don't actually, and men don't get treated the same either. Okay, now I will always say that we need to treat everybody differently. We need to treat people as their needs, as they need it. So we treat everyone as an individual. We lump people together, we group people together, because that's important, because there are shared experiences. There are, safety in numbers. There are community groups, networks that are really, really important that you have that connection to. But at the same time, we need to start thinking about people as individuals. Okay. Women pay scales were lower than men's until 1961. So in the 60s, so there was a film about this, actually. It was about the Dagenham Forge strike happened, and women machinists were regraded as unskilled despite men in exactly the same role, being in a high grade and paid more. Women went on strike, and the car seats that they made, they ran out. So they finally settled for 92% of the rate of pay to unskilled male workers. So it was still not the same. All right. And it took striking, it took a business, getting onto the precipice of going under because they were out of stock, and, all of the issues that comes with that, and that no doubt many of us understand. We still couldn't get equality when it came to pay. Okay. But it did lead to the Equal Pay Act, which was the first legislation in the world, in fairness to us as a society, as a UK, which aimed at ending pay discrimination. 70s and 80s, Sex Discrimination Act was passed. More women came into the construction industry. In fact, there's an example of Hackney's local authority. When it ran its new build training scheme, over 50% of the trainees were women. So what we've got a position where women want to get into the industry. We have to acknowledge the barriers that they face. We've got some fantastic women in the industry now on this call. We have to acknowledge that, some of our experience, some of your experiences, you wouldn't choose for other family members, daughters, nieces, family, friends, but you've done it. And actually, it's a great environment to be in. It's a great industry to be in when you're in that right space. We have to create an open, transparent, understanding industry, society, culture, so that we attract and retain the best talent. Okay. Today, there is an increase in positive representation, action, and numbers. The number of women employed in the construction industry reached nearly 350,000 in Q2 of 2023. 15% of UK construction industry are women. However, women make up only 1% of the manual workforce. Okay. And that there's a few things at play. There'll be biases that people don't think it's women's work, and that doesn't make any of us misogynists. That doesn't make any of us think that women are less capable. It's a bias. It's an opinion. It's our experiences that we have, our viewpoint that we have, that perhaps we don't even know we've got it. It is schools. If you think about, we go back to who is being encouraged to go into construction industry as a career, as a profession. The chances are it's not women that are being encouraged to learn about the industry and what's going on there. So there's a few things at play. What we need to think about is what we can do as individuals and as organizations. All right. And that's where we take our ownership. And that's where we look at accountability for ourselves, and we look at what influence we have to support and to change. I've referenced equality, I've referenced equity already. What I'm now going to do is try and explain what that is. So equality versus equity. Equality is everybody is given the same resources or opportunities. Okay, so effectively we treat people the same. Well, I've told everybody about this job opportunity. Fantastic. Equity is recognizing that everybody has their own specific needs. So therefore, we need to give resources and opportunities to suit individual circumstances. So going back to that job opportunity, well, I've told everyone that job opportunity exists. Fantastic. Equality. I've thought about everybody. I've treated everyone the same. Actually, what you've got is someone in your team who's got quite severe dyslexia. And the process for that job application is a written online form. Well, I've told everyone about it. Everyone knows that it exists, but somebody has a barrier in place that is of no fault of anyone's, that makes it harder for them to apply. They could be the best person, but if they have a significant barrier to apply, they're not going to. We're not going to get that best person. So what do? Well, actually, that person, if I as a line manager, if I as a leader, if I as a HR professional know that that person has got dyslexia, okay, let's do a telephone interview. Or, I'll ask you the questions and I'll scribe the answers for you. Brilliant. That doesn't mean me, who doesn't have dyslexia, is at a disadvantage. That just means I'm understanding and aware that somebody has some slight different needs to me, to allow them the same opportunity to access. That's all we're looking to do. Sometimes we look at in terms of boxes, right? So, everybody gets the same box to stand and look over a wall, but everyone's a different height. So some people might need 2 boxes to see over the wall. But if I treat everyone the same, I'm just going to give everyone one box. There you go, crack on. Job done. The reality is I need to think slightly differently. Okay, well, how many boxes does that person need to see over the wall? Because that person doesn't need any, because they're 6'8". Well, this person's 5'2". Okay, so let's give them 3 boxes. Again, there's no advantage. All we're looking to do is allow everybody the same outcome of opportunity. Okay. When there's an opportunity for progression on site, everyone is made aware and given an equal chance to apply. So that's our equality. And equity is thinking differently. So is adjusting our PPE offered to everybody on site. Our workwear and equipment is comfortable, fits everyone safely and correctly. If somebody needs prescription safety goggles, I don't wear glasses, so I don't need that. But if somebody does, I don't think that's unfair. I don't think that shouldn't happen. I don't think that they shouldn't have prescription safety goggles. Why? Because they need them. That's fine. Like, if they need them to be safe, to do their job, it's not an issue for me. And that's the difference between equality and equity. Equity is where we look at everybody's needs. Now, how do we do that? Well, how do we think about every single person that is in our organization? You don't. You as individuals think about who are your core group of people. Who are the 5, 6, 7, 8 colleagues in your team? Or who are your direct reports? Who are your key stakeholders? And we focus on and manage and find a manageable number. I don't know how many people we have. Some of you will be in organizations where you've got 3,000 people. You cannot, as an individual, know all about those 3,000 people. But what you can know about are the 5 or 6 people in your team. What needs do they have? What needs do you have? Have you even acknowledged that? Okay. And therefore, then we can start making tweaks and changes for the individuals. That is our first way of accelerating action. If somebody feels that their individual needs are respected, are valued, they will feel like they belong. If we create a sense of belonging, we create a better environment for everybody, because culturally we're setting the tone. We're setting the tone of, I know that everybody's different. I respect your individuality. I understand your individuality. I acknowledge that you might need to be treated differently. Let's do something about it, which is so powerful for those of us that have ever needed some slight difference. And it might be a slight working condition. It might be an early finish to go and watch a nativity play or sports day or whatever it might be. Go to the gym because actually, you're running a marathon for charity, and that charity is directly linked to a health issue that your parent might have had. Whatever it is, it's really, really important that you feel that your needs are being met. And actually, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about belonging, everything comes back to safety. and our there's a neuroscience, and our hierarchy of needs, and being safe and having our needs met is a core element of that. Okay. Swizz past that one. Right. What barriers exist? Oh, I thought I'd delete these ones out. Right, here we go. We've gone through those. So women make up 15% of the construction industry in the UK. Women from an ethnic minority make up 10.7%. Okay. The average age range of a worker in the construction industry is 45 to 50, and there will be an extra 250,000 jobs to fill in the UK construction by 2028. So we know that we need to do something differently. We need to attract different talent, new talent into the industry. We need to retain the talent that we have got. Okay. Okay. Over to you. Like, what barriers exist to change? Why don't people want to change the industry? Why don't people? What stops people from changing the industry? You can take yourself off mute. You can pop something into the chat. I obviously have got my answers primed, ready. But what stops people? What barriers exist to change?
I don't mind coming off mute. I was going to say, I think some of the big barriers are people don't understand all the variety of jobs that are within our industry that they could do. Because like you say, I think there's a lot of preconception out there that it's all manual work and that, which might not lean to everyone's interests, etc. So it's about just not understanding the variety.
Yeah, and not just that, actually, it's not understanding that sometimes that foot in the door is enough. How many of us have gone into an organization or gone into a role that I actually don't really want this role, but I want to be in this company, and I know that I'll then be able to move, shift. Lack of clarity on career development, career path, lack of education about it and awareness in schools, lack of role models, the historical bias. Absolutely, all of these add in to huge barriers. The size of the industry in terms of pounds, definitely, there is so much opportunity in construction. I mean, it's the second biggest industry from an economic perspective in the UK. It's second behind the financial sector. So it is so key in our country for our sort of economic success. What we have to think about is, of the points that we've raised for what barriers exist, what can we change? So can we change attitude? Yes. Can we change our historical biases? Yes. Can we support, depending upon what role we're in, can we support in terms of clarity on career development, career path? Yes. Can we support, going into schools? I know many of your organisations do go into schools, they do go into universities to try and help people understand the different roles that there are. Lack of role models, lack of visibility. What are we doing to try and share that, people like you do exist, people like me do exist in the industry? Okay. So yeah, absolutely. What we also need to think about, barriers that exist to creating this more inclusive environment, are lack of flexible working. Okay. Whether it's childcare, care and responsibilities, whether it is, long hours away from home, or long hours, in a isolated environment, which can have an impact on mental health. We've also had the feeling that vocalizing additional needs will put someone at a disadvantage. Yeah, great point. Change itself, going out of comfort zones. Definitely. I'm telling you, yeah, we need to change. We need to vocalize that we have a different need. Absolutely. What actually we have to try and think about is, how do we invite someone into the conversation? So what we need to do as leaders is be vulnerable and honest and open, and say, right, actually, do you know what? And I've had it, in various different situations where someone said, oh yeah, actually, I've got really, I'm going to use the dyslexia example again. I've got really, really severe dyslexia that actually it takes me, double the amount of time to write a report that it does one of my colleagues. And I've never shared that until someone said, actually, like, why does it, a line manager said, why does it take you so long? It should only take you an hour or an hour and a half. And I was like, well, actually, it's because. And then what happened? Well, we'll get you a different laptop. We'll get you some new software updated. So a lot of the time we have to invite people in so that they feel safe. Okay. But flexible working, we don't have flexible working. If we don't have flexible working, then we won't ever change the industry. Unfit PPE. Why don't, if this uniform is not for me, you can't even get me, a female fit pair of trousers, a size 14 pair of trousers. Why do I need to wear a medium blokes? Many of you on the call will be like probably nodding along. We are making some massive strides with that. But actually, if you can't even get me a high vis that fits, for my body shape, actually, am I really valued here? Because we know they exist. Okay, we know they exist. Proximity, maternity and paternity, the impacts of maternity and paternity pay or lack of. Okay, if we don't have a enhanced maternity paternity policy, then people just won't come back. We won't attract groups of people into our organization if we don't value or we don't acknowledge and accept that, you know, maternity paternity pay has a huge impact. Proximity bias, so out of sight, out of mind. Well, if we don't have women, if we don't have, different characteristics of people that work in our organization, I'm not going to think about them, because I don't need to think about them, because they're not in my consciousness. Okay, because from a proximity bias, out of sight, out of mind. Discrimination. Okay, so discrimination unfortunately does exist. Its comments, its behaviors isn't always overt. It might not even be deliberate. There is a type of discrimination called indirect discrimination. All right, but it still exists. Okay. Right. The important thing about feeling like we belong is we can show up as ourselves. If you are being your authentic self, if you are comfortable, if you are secure and you feel like you belong, we will work better. And that's fact. That is proven for various different studies across various different years in various different industries. But if we create a place where your inherent worth and dignity are recognized, then you will work harder. You are more likely to bring different ideas to the table. You are more likely to challenge when you see something that you don't think is quite right. You're more likely to keep people safe. If we create a place where everybody feels like they belong, we will be better as an organization. Okay. The value of belonging in our careers, it helps us as individuals and organization develop. We influence positive behaviors. We are connected, supported, and respected, and we are more willing to take risks and more comfortable asking for and giving help to people. Okay. We gain a better gender balance. There's gender balance on that last one that you can't see. It's not quite formatted. So what happens when we try and create this sense of belonging, this belonging environment? It goes beyond feeling like, do I fit in here? What we have to think about is, actually, can I connect with my peers professionally? Do I trust my peers, my supervisors, my leaders? Is my unique experience valued? Can I raise issues without feeling judged or without feeling persecuted or without fear of negative repercussions? Am I able to show up as my authentic self? I'm going to use tattoos as an example for that, because even still today, there is and this number is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but there is still a school of thought of people that if you have tattoos, you're not professional. You cannot have tattoos on show because it is deemed to be unprofessional. Unprofessional by who? Is my question. But that is still someone's view. So if you feel like you have to cover up and you can't embrace your individuality and how you want to demonstrate that individuality, for whether it's dress, whether it's tattoos, whether it's hairstyle, whatever that might be, piercings, whatever, that means you're holding something back of yourself. That means somebody has a view of you based on not you as an individual, you and your value set, you and what your talent and how good you are at your job, but based on an aesthetic, based on an accent, based on a road that you might have been brought up on. Okay, all of these things are not about you as individuals and your value set. They are about a characteristic of you. They are about what you may look like. Actually, if you feel like you have to look different, you have to wear something slightly, you're never going to be fully comfortable. You're never going to feel like you belong. Okay, and when we think about when we belong, actually, this is a brilliant Liz and Molly slide about ideas people share when they do feel like belong versus ideas people share when they don't. The difference between inclusion, a successful organization that demonstrates inclusion, and an organization that doesn't demonstrate inclusion and belonging, are ideas. What stems from ideas? Creativity, innovation, efficiency, productivity, high performing teams, motivation, happiness, respect, profit. What we want to do is create this brilliant environment for everybody. We are businesses, right? None of us, as far as I'm aware, work for charities. Even so, we still have to be a successful charity. We get a financial benefit from creating a place where people belong, because people feel safe to contribute, to bring ideas, to challenge behaviors. Okay. That does not mean everybody gets on. That does not mean we are one big happy family. But what it means is there is a base level of respect and acknowledgement for individuals and differences, which we then look to harness and use. Okay. Right. Where can we create a feeling of belonging? Okay, so I said, what can we do? And this is where I'm going to sort of leave this slide up for a minute or two, just for you to sort of mull over. What can we do? What can you do as individuals to create this sense of belonging? And this sense of belonging is where people feel respected and valued. So sometimes we need to flip it. So what environment, what questions, what relationships, what situations make you feel like you belong? And how can we create that for other people? How can we create that in our daily work environment? How can we create that within senior teams? How can we create that if we've got HR professionals on the call or recruiting managers during our recruitment process? We're making decisions during meetings. So meetings, we'll always say about taking meeting notes, you know, and how many times, you know, the most senior woman in the room has been asked to take meetings, and she is the most senior person, and actually she's the one leading the meeting. Okay, that doesn't make somebody a misogynist. That doesn't mean that somebody, you know, doesn't value that particular female, but that is just that inherent bias behavior that we've been brought up with, that we have to challenge and change. So the only way we can challenge and change those behaviors is when we know they happen. And if we don't, and if we're not told, oh, actually, do you know what, Sophie, you shouldn't have said that, or that's probably a bit outdated, or look, can I just say, like, maybe next time, if I'm not told that, if I'm not given that feedback, then actually it makes it very difficult for me to learn. It makes it very difficult for me to acknowledge or understand a time where actually I probably would change my behavior next time. Okay. So, and I've spoken around it, or I've spoken, you know, whilst it's been on the screen, but you know, we all need to think, and as we said at the beginning, we're going to share these slides. We need to think what can we do in each of these environments, in each of these situations where applicable to me, to make people feel like they belong. And, you know, it's Ramadan at the minute. I know many of your organizations will have done a sort of, not a call to action necessarily, but you know, probably an information piece about what Ramadan is, what it means. That's brilliant. That makes someone feel like they belong. You know, if we're talking about Pride Month, absolutely, let's talk about, you know, different gender identities and different sexual orientations, and talk about why Pride matters and is important to talk about and reference. There's lots of festivals, celebratory days, celebratory timeframes that acknowledge different groups of people. Well, actually, if we as an organisation, why is it important to acknowledge these different days, these different celebrations? Because it makes someone feel like they belong. Oh, you know that about me. You've acknowledged that's important enough. That characteristic of me, or that part of me, is important enough for you to acknowledge as an organisation. Wow, that's cool. Okay, so it might seem relatively small, and for those of us that don't need that, you know, some of us will feel like we belong more than others, because some of us will fit a particular tick box of characteristics. So these extra steps, they're not for us per se. We get a knock-on benefit, because if someone's talking about flexible working from a childcare perspective, actually, if I want flexible working because of because I want to go to the gym, as I said earlier in reference to that example, then that's fine. That gives me the freedom as well. Okay. What are the risks? So over to you guys again. What are the risks when individuals don't belong or feel like they don't belong? What are the risks?
Well, they don't perform their best, do they?
Absolutely.
As you've said already.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't perform the best, and that is a key. And if I don't perform my best as an individual, then I'm never going to progress as far as I should, if that's what I want to do, because my, the view will be, well, they're not that good, or they're not as good as other people because I'm not performing my best. Definitely. Rolling back into the chat, we've got people are disengaged, we've got brain drain, so people leaving, high staff turnover, they leave the business, losing talent, views and voices are not heard. Brilliant. So absolutely, we lose people will leave. And in terms of those views and voices are not heard, views and voices are not heard, perspectives, opinions will never be changed, because we don't feel safe to share our view, share our voice, give our opinion. Stress and anxiety, absolutely. The knock-on impact of pretending to be someone, or feeling like actually you're an imposter and you don't belong here, absolutely can lead to stress and anxiety. Definitely. As organizations, we've said higher turnover will get unbalanced decisions. There's a lot of groupthink. If I've only got the same type of people with the same lived experiences around a table making decisions, actually, are they the right decisions if we want to move into new markets? Actually, have I got anyone in the room or anyone involved in this conversation that perhaps has a more of affinity to the new market I'm trying to move into than the rest of us? Who is more educated? Who has a greater experience about that particular new market? I'm going to use this as an example. Rihanna, I say singer, actually, she's a businesswoman now, but Rihanna started a beauty brand, and that beauty brand was predominantly for women of color to give easier access, so high street access to beauty products, makeup specifically to women of color, because in the main you could not get that on the high street. Like, it just didn't exist. She took that idea and she wanted to team up. She went to both MAC and Bobbi Brown, to two of the biggest beauty brands in the world. She took those ideas to Bobbi Brown and MAC, and they both turned her down. Fortunately, she was in a position where she was financially able to do it herself, which she did. Lo and behold, she did that. She used her expertise, she used her lived experience, and created a product for people like her, okay, women of color. Lo and behold, MAC and Bobbi Brown now follow suit, and now have a vast ream and lots of different using foundation as an example, lots of different foundation colors for loads of different skin tones, which is fantastic. But it took a woman of color to bring that idea and do something to then prompt others, and for other bigger businesses to recognize that actually there is a market for this. So if we do not have a diverse group of people around a table generating ideas, we will never innovate, create, go into new markets, be as successful as we can be. We don't want to create a toxic work environment. We don't want to have poor communication. What we want to have is psychological safety. We want to be able to learn from our peers. We want to positively grow both as individuals, and we want to have this lifelong learning culture. That isn't just going and getting qualifications. This is about learning about people and building our empathy and building our awareness. Okay. 85% of women still view some roles as male only. Okay. I've got my stats on a different slide. Here we go. The number of women in construction has declined in the last year, and 21% of women in construction who are planning to change jobs within the next 3 months, 12% it was because of a male-dominated culture. Interestingly, that masculine energy, as a quote that has been used more recently, particularly over the pond, particularly over in the States, actually can have a huge negative impact, and could have a huge negative impact on the construction industry. What skills do we need? And I'm gonna throw these out actually. What skills do we need to accelerate belonging? Emotional intelligence. We need bravery. We need to be a forward thinker. We need to be a good listener. We need to positively influence. All right. This is everybody's responsibility. We need to be factual. We need to be accountable. Okay. We need to really start to think about how we can create this lifelong learning environment. This is everybody's responsibility. Okay. We have to improve the image of construction. We have to really, really think about us as individuals, how we can impact it. Okay. I'm just going to jump ahead to say, there we go. What can we do? So we need to improve the image. We need to understand our privilege. Okay. And it's a collective effort. So going to talk about privilege, and this is called a wheel of privilege, and I appreciate it's quite difficult to look at, but privilege does not mean we've had an easy life. Okay, privilege means that in certain situations we've had less barriers than other people. It does not mean we aren't deserving of the role that we're in. It does not mean we haven't worked hard for what we've earned. But what it means is there are certain situations and certain characteristics of ourselves that versus somebody else, we will have had less barriers. Okay. The gist of this wheel is the closer you are to the middle, the more privilege you have. And the more we all start to understand and acknowledge where our privilege is, the more open, the more empathetic we can be. As an example, I know that I'm never going to be racially profiled in an airport at security. And I say that, and that doesn't make me racist to say that out loud, but what that means is I acknowledge that I have privilege, I have white privilege in that situation, because I do not have to worry going into an airport that I'm going to be racially profiled. I never had to think about changing my name, anglicizing my name to make it easy for people to remember and learn. I've never had to think about anglicizing my name to make it more likely that I get called for a job interview. And these might seem really small, inconsequential, but actually, is it inconsequential if I then don't get invited to an interview because of how my name sounds? I then don't get that job, I then don't get that career, I then don't get that salary point, I then don't get the, and then my financial security is reduced. Okay, it's load, it's a load, a mental load, an emotional load that I don't have to worry about, that somebody else does. So at the very least, it's a space in my mind that isn't taken up, that frees up my mind for something else. Privilege and acknowledging our privilege can be very, very emotive. So it's really, really important for us to start to talk about it, and start to talk about it without guilt. It is what it is. It doesn't mean that we've had an easy life. It doesn't mean that we've been given a silver spoon. It does not mean that we haven't earned what we've got. But what it means is there are certain situations where we have faced less barriers. Okay. And when we start, as I say, when we start to acknowledge the situations where we do have an easier route, okay, a less challenging route, that allows me then to acknowledge a different group of people that what can I do to make their route a bit easier? What different support does an individual need so that they can see over that wall that I can see over with only one box? You need 2 boxes? Okay, well, let's get you a box then. That's all we're trying to do. All we're trying to do is rebase and tweak the privileges that exist out there. I'm not giving away any of my privilege. I've got that, it's inherent. But what I'm doing, acknowledging the situations where actually I've had it slightly easier, I've had it less challenging. Okay. And like I say, this is not about people feeling guilty. Okay, it's just we have to start acknowledging it. What can we do? Right, data, benchmark. Think about our CIC partners, and can we benchmark against them? Annual engagement surveys. Do people feel like they belong? Statistically, are we seeing, if we've got a 50-50 gender split from an operative level, is that tracking up to managerial levels? No. Why not? What stage are people moving or dropping off? Okay. Are there any sort of trends in our data, whether it's a particular age range, whether it's a particular level, grading level, whether it's a particular manager, department? Okay. We have to have open communication. We have to be willing to acknowledge the times that we have to learn, the times that we have to tweak our behaviors, the fact that somebody will say, this is how this makes me feel. What we cannot do is say, oh, I don't believe you, or no, that's not what they meant, I don't believe you, I don't think that that's what happened. If somebody says, this is my interpretation of a situation, this is my perception of a situation, that person's perception is their reality. So it's not on us to question that reality. It is on us to listen and learn. Okay. We have to address those who don't understand reasonable adjustments. A reasonable adjustment, and I've said this is about the dyslexia example, a reasonable adjustment is a tweak or a change that we make to help someone in their job. That is it. Okay. networks, whether it's women's networks, whether it's race ethnicity networks, whether it's pride networks. Okay, this creates a safe space. It doesn't mean special treatment, it doesn't mean exclusion, it just means that we create a safe space of people with shared experiences. The majority of people who work in construction are white straight males. So in terms of the safe space, actually, in the main, every environment in construction is a safe space for white straight males. I'm talking in generalizations, okay? So what we have to do, we have to fabricate, or we have to engineer is a better word, actually. Fabricate's incorrect. We have to engineer a space for other groups of people, because it doesn't naturally exist, because none of the other groups of people are naturally, in the majority. So we have to engineer networks for people. Exit interviews. Now, what's really interesting, we have to think about inclusion or lack of belonging, lack of inclusion in our exit interviews, right? Is it because of behavior? Is it because of PPE? Is it because of lack of representation? Is it because of lack of flexible working? We have to think about what makes you stay. So not exit interviews, but stay interviews. Why do you stay? What makes you stay? What do we do well at? Okay, why do you like that environment? What do you gain from that situation? Do you feel like you're valued? Why are you valued? So ask it back. So instead of waiting for the exit interview, let's understand why people want to stay here. Revise our policies. Okay, menopause policies, maternity policies, paternity policies, recruitment policies, mental health policies which generally affect, women. We're talking about International Women's Day. Women, what can we do to make sure that those policies are fit for purpose? Okay. And then it says at the bottom there, male allies. So male allies, as we've said, belonging positively impacts everybody. So it isn't just about women. It's not just about women. It's not just about women, people from an ethnic minority. It's not just about people with disabilities. It's not people with different gender identity. This impacts everybody. How can belonging impact men's mental health? Okay. Over 2/3 of the construction industry believe there's a stigma around mental health. Okay. Workers in the industry are at highest risk of suicide in the country, 3.7 times higher than the national average. This is an epidemic. By having enhanced policies, by thinking about belonging, by looking at flexible working, by looking at paternity leave, maternity leave, by creating a psychologically safe environment where people can share, can be vulnerable, can ask for help, that openness, that belonging will impact everybody positively. Working conditions, okay? Flexible working, pressure to meet take deadlines, to be safer, okay? The need to perform highly means that we are on edge at times, but belonging can support our working conditions and make everybody be in a better place from a safety perspective, from a stress perspective, from a pressure perspective, okay? Right, an ally is a partner or person who's got your back, okay? Allyship in the workplace is we use our privilege, our personal privilege, to support underrepresented groups. So we call out and we call in. So we stand up against bias, but actually we call people in for a conversation, okay? Let's help people understand. Most people do not say things deliberately to offend, right? That is not born out of malice. There will always be a small group of people who do that, but the vast majority will say the wrong thing, not to offend, not to upset, not to cause harm, but because they don't know any different. So whilst it's important that we call it out, as in, look, let's not say that again, or this is how that made me feel, or I think actually you're gonna, you shouldn't say that. Call someone in, and this is why. I don't want you to make that mistake again. I want to, actually what we're thinking about is giving somebody the chance to learn, giving someone the chance to make a different choice next time. A lot of people don't understand any of this because they've not had to. Why isn't menopause taught as standard to GPs? Because it's not women writing the academic syllabuses. It's not women in charge of medical schools. Okay, it's not women who are at the higher echelons of the British Medical Association. So we don't talk about it. That doesn't mean everybody in those positions hates women, wants women to go through all this pain. It just means they've never had to think about it. So we have to call people into the conversations. We have to switch our perspectives. Would you say that to a man? You know, and that's what I think a lot of the time. You know, I was using the example of a powerhouse. Someone said powerhouse woman. Like, is that a phrase that we use for men as well? I don't know. And I have to think. And sometimes I'll go and ask questions. Like on I've got a WhatsApp group with like 8 of us, 8 women in. And I said, what do you think? And ask the question. I don't know everything, but it's about asking the questions and getting different perspectives. Sometimes it's would you say that to a man? Would you do that if that was a man? And vice versa. Okay, try and change our perspective. Put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Think about inclusive language. Is that changing? Here we go. Think about inclusive language. Job adverts, you know, banksman, yardsman, fireman. I know fireman's not within the construction industry, but you see where I'm coming from. The man on the end implicitly suggests to my 6-year-old son that that is a job for a man. And therefore, it also implicitly suggests to she's only 1, but 1-year-old daughter that that is not a job for her. Okay. Language matters. All right. Bring people in. Harmful behavior, we have to challenge it. Sexist behavior, you know, there's a reason that the sexual harassment law has changed, and now there's a bigger emphasis on organizations now to be accountable, to demonstrate that you're trying to actively prevent sex discrimination, sex harassment, sexual harassment. So the banter is often used as the excuse. I was only having a laugh. It's not funny. Okay. And that's fine, but we had to help people understand why it's not funny. Call people in, educate. What, you know, just because you think it's funny doesn't mean everybody else will appreciate it. Where is everybody's line in the sand? Do you know enough about that person to make that joke? Really simple sort of rules of engagement, for want of a better phrase, you know, boundaries that people can work within. Fantastic. Help people understand, help people learn. Educate yourself on challenges, right? Faced by women, the wider organization, the industry, different groups of people. Showcase role models, which we said about, and be accountable, demonstrate accountability. All right. We have to embrace being uncomfortable. Okay. We have to create positive change. And actually, at times, we have to be disruptive. Okay. We are more likely to learn and remember when we are self-aware. What views do I have? Where do I source my information from? Okay. We have to educate and not shame people. All right. We give people the benefit of the doubt. When we need to, we have to have productive conflict. But what we need is public and strong top-down advocacy. We need to have inclusion leaders to be proactive. All right. The proactivity is really, really important. If I jump back to this slide, slide 39, male allies are reactive. So it's when we intervene, it's when we jump in, and that can be after the event or it can be during. Okay. But an ally is reactive. An inclusion leader is proactive. Strategy, support, policies, processes. You have to have, you know, more influence, I would say, a greater sphere of influence, a greater sphere of control, a greater level of responsibility. But actually, everybody will be a role model and a leader to some people. So who is in your sphere of influence? What are you doing to be proactive, to be a proactive, inclusive leader? Okay. This is what we gain from creating an inclusive environment. We retain talent. We're a attractive employer. We generate customer loyalty. We has a unique selling point. We manage reputational risk and legal challenges. We increase up our revenue. We increase up our creativity and innovation. We make better decisions faster. We increase our market share. We improve our shareholder wealth. And there was a McKinsey report from 2022 that demonstrated that organizations who were truly diverse and inclusive, so it wasn't just a tick box, it wasn't just performative, it was genuinely a cultural, inclusive and belonging environment, improved up their EBIT, so their measure of profit, by up to 33%. I have a finance background, so I can say, well, actually, that's a huge amount of number. How do you prove that? I don't believe McKinsey, with their reputation, would put a number out into ether if they didn't believe it. I equally think if there was a 20% margin of error on that 33%, I'd still take that increase in profit. All right. We create high-performing teams and we improve our customer and supplier experience. There are no negatives for creating a sense of belonging for everyone. There aren't. There can be negatives in the implementation because people don't understand, we don't communicate it well enough, but the actual outcome, there are no negative outcomes from creating a truly diverse and inclusive environment. We have to treat people fairly, not the same. We have to pull everybody in. Some of us have more privilege than others. So we need to start acknowledging what that privilege is, using that privilege to move our boxes around to support individuals so that we create this overarching sense of belonging. Right, questions. We've got 5 minutes. What questions, if any, do people have? I mean, I'll take none, but anyone have any questions on anything that I've covered? Okay, listen, what we have to think about is, sorry, Anthea, is that you?
No.
What we need to think about is what can we do as individuals? I said earlier on about our little sphere of influence. So those 5, 6 people, it could be 12, well, whoever they are, whether it's our teammates, whether it is our direct reports, whether it is our key stakeholders, we need to think about, what do I know about these individuals? What needs do they have? How can I make them feel like they belong? And then all of a sudden, we start thinking about the individual needs that people have. We start to get into that habit of building empathy. Some of us will be more empathetic naturally than others, right? But that doesn't mean if you don't feel like you're that naturally empathetic, you can't build that. You can. Who are those people that we work alongside the closest? What do I know about them? What needs do they have? What needs do I have? Actually, if you were to look at your perfect working environment, what would that look like? It may not actually look like your working world at the minute. It might be slightly different. It might be that you have, you know, a day working from home where you get your headphones in when you've got a project on. Like I've had to do this. When I worked in an office, you were not allowed your headphones on. That's it. The view was you were just sat there not working very hard. What I've realized is there is a particular type of music, there's a frequency of music which helps me focus. Binaural beats, so like a focus one, like it's a frequency that helps me focus. So I work even at home with my headphones in because I need that music to help me concentrate, which is a world away from that view of, well, you're not taking it seriously. She's just listened to a podcast or she's just listened to a music. She can't be doing any work. Why? Because I don't need that. If my manager doesn't need that noise, they're not going to understand. So if we build that view of our individuals, it's really, really important that we start to make changes, start to think about what my needs are, what your needs are. Brilliant. Create this environment where everybody gets what they need so they can be the best they can be.
We've got a question.
Yes. What support, resource, techniques are available to address our own unconscious bias? Brilliant. So the problem that you've got with unconscious bias, there's a couple of things, Francis, a couple of things that are the issue with unconscious bias. One is we don't know that we have it because it's unconscious. And 2, unconscious bias is an overarching phrase for about 50 actual different types of biases that exist. So that might think, well, I'm never going to climb that mountain. You are. What we just need to acknowledge is the more we learn about different experiences and different perspectives, the less our unconscious bias will come to the fore. Our bias is a decision-making tool. So our brain takes in so much information at any given point, has to filter it all out, that our brain creates shortcuts. These shortcuts are our biases. So it might be an accent. Oh, I've heard that accent before. I know about that. Bang. So all of a sudden it makes that shortcut for me. I know what your type is like. Okay, because my brain is helping me make a faster decision. What we have to do is we have to challenge ourselves. So the music artists that you normally listen to somebody else. The authors who you read something else. The people who you follow on social media, follow different types of people. The films you watch, the TV programs you're drawn to, the algorithms that exist all around us, your Spotify curated for you, your Netflix, because you watch, we think you might like. Ignore it all. Try something completely different. Because generally, one of our unconscious biases is called affinity bias, where we are naturally drawn to people and things where we share characteristics. So I'm naturally drawn to actors who I feel an affinity to. So I'm more likely to watch that film. Well, if I watch that film, I'm more likely then to get a next film by the same director or with the same actor in, or with a similar theme. So all of my, and again, another bias is our confirmation bias. I'm more likely to agree with an opinion that underpins an already held opinion I have. I'm less likely to put myself in the space of countering that opinion. So I have to be really conscious about the media, particularly that I consume. Okay. So by watching different programs, going against my algorithms, going against my suggested for yous, it draws me into different life experiences that I haven't had. Different conversations as well with people. Google things like, I've referenced Ramadan already. Google it. Just Google what it is if you're not sure. If you've never experienced it, you've never worked with someone to ask, you've never known, Google it. Use all of the different information points at our disposal. What we then start to do is we build a different view of the different unconscious biases that we have, because that fast decision can't be as fast anymore, because that person with that accent, well, actually, I understand more things about that person with that accent now, or that accent doesn't have that same resonance anymore because I've learned other stuff about people from that area. Okay, so my brain then can't make that fast decision because I've added extra information in for it to consider and for it to process. So it's not an easy one, Francis. In fairness, I might have thought scared you off, but take in different forms of media. That's the first port of call. Read different articles, follow different people on LinkedIn or on X or whatever you're on, and just ask questions. Be curious. Curiosity will help. Okay. Jenny has asked about, great to see a few men on the call. Absolutely. How do we recruit more male allies? First things first, we have to break down male privilege. We have to start to explain that. And that's a huge blocker. The blocker is, you're telling me that I've caused all of these society ills. You're telling me that I get loads of advantages because I'm a bloke. Hopefully I've demonstrated quite fast, but nonetheless that is not the case when it comes to privilege. So we have to break down what the main barriers are to stopping men getting involved in inclusion and belonging, because we've never invited them in. Okay, because actually diversity inclusion did come from thinking about minority groups, underrepresented groups, and we have excluded males, but actually now we're at a place of, we need to draw men in. Therefore, we have to say, look, privilege does exist. I have privilege as a female in situations. Like, I'm a middle-class white woman. I've got loads of bloody privilege. I've probably got, more privilege than many of the men on this call. And it's just about breaking down the misconceptions around the word privilege, around the word bias, and around the word patriarchy. And sometimes it's moving away from them completely and almost rebranding it to help people understand more. But what we have to do is, the main blockers are, you don't want me in this space. You think I'm the cause of all of this. You think I've got a load of privilege. And actually, I've had a really hard life. Draw people in. Start to explain some of these big emotive words and help people understand that it isn't just as simple as man equals privilege, man equals better off, because it's far, far more in depth than that. Is a starter for 10. Top-down advocacy, get senior blokes involved and say, look, this is really important. Whether we can get a one-to-one with them to explain what bias is, to explain what the patriarchy is, to explain what their role is, etc., etc. Start to draw people in, start to try and get somebody to set the tone. Top-down advocacy is really, really powerful. Start to normalize conversations about inclusion, about belonging, about how people feel valued. When we think about our PDRs, when we think about our one-to-ones, usually there's a question at the beginning of, everything okay? But a lot of time people think it's just a sort of you have to ask me that and you don't really care. How can I demonstrate? What questions can I actually ask? Instead of talking about efficiency, productivity, outcome, have you done that action? It's right, what do you need? Is everything okay? And let's be more structured around that sense of belonging and culturally start to make a shift in the conversations we have with people and what our focus is. Okay. Hopefully that's answered it a little bit, Jenny.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. Listen, I appreciate we've gone a few minutes over time, so apologies about that. I know people have had to jump off. Anthony, I don't know if you want to close.
Yes. So just to say thank you everybody for coming. Please do go and tell, particularly your male colleagues, that we're running these webinars, and encourage them to sign up. And if we end up being full the next two, we'll run some more. So no worries if we get a huge demand. And we will send out the slides once we've run all the webinars. So just give us a chance to run through the webinars. We will send out all the slides. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see all of you again at future webinars. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to press the stop.
Oh, don't end.
I won't end.
I'm going to hands raised.
Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording. That's all.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. I'm just going to stop this.
No.
So we've got a few hands raised, Anthony. If that's okay, I'm going to try and take them in order. I think it was. Oh, I've just put my own hand up. Didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I think it was Francis that had her hand, or their hand first, I should say, actually.